speaking there. And he's not the only one that's sort of put themselves forward today. The Assistant Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, has been recently appointed, has been speaking with the media in Sydney. Let's go to that now.
Hi. Earlier today, a couple of my colleagues indicated that they're going to call a spill in the party room next Tuesday. The Prime Minister, in a press conference just a few moments ago, indicated that my colleagues are entitled to call a spill, but that he has spoken to Julie Bishop and they are united in defeating this spill motion. I believe that the spill motion should be defeated and will be defeated. We saw from the Labor Party when they were in government, it turned out like a very bad horror movie. I just don't want to buy another ticket to such a horror movie. And that's why we should defeat this spill motion and we should ensure that we rally behind Tony Abbott as Prime Minister and Julie Bishop as his deputy.
How are the Liberals any better than Labor, given what you've said about them in the past?
Well, we are better because of what we've achieved over the first 18 months, a very proud record of 3 free trade agreements, keeping our commitments to abolishing the mining tax and the carbon tax and stopping the boats and a whole range of other policies.
You still can't keep your troops in line.
But of course, the last week or so has been destabilising, it's been disappointing, but with the defeat of this spill motion on Tuesday, I believe that the troops will rally behind Tony Abbott and we'll get back on track doing what we were elected to do, which is to govern for the Australian people.
Are you opposed to this spill motion because it's the best thing for the country or because you don't want to be like Labor? I'm
opposed to this spill motion for both reasons. I'm opposed to this spill motion because with Labor we saw the destabilisation and dysfunction of leadership tensions. I'm also opposed to the spill motion because I believe it brings instability to the country. And right now we have some major challenges, economic as well as national security. In both those areas, Tony Abbott and his team have displayed both calm and a resolute approach to the challenges that are in front of the country, and we need to continue that work.
But at least, but a policy
that Malcolm Turnbull also won't support a spill motion and that he is 100% behind the Prime Minister.
Well, as Malcolm Turnbull's made it very clear, and you know he's a very valued colleague of mine and of the Prime Minister and everyone else. He's made it very clear he's not challenging for the Prime Ministership. So I'm sure he would join me and Julie Bishop and Tony Abbott and others in opposing the spill motion.
Simpkins and Don Randall then, I mean, calling a spill when there's no candidate and according to your version, no possible candidate in the near future?
Well, that's a question you'd have to ask them. But clearly there are some concerned colleagues and it's their entire right to call this spill motion. But I don't think it has the support of the majority of the party room and I think it will be defeated.
Can you tell us a little about the conversation between Mr Abbott and Mr Bishop?
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall there, but I wasn't, so I can't tell you.
Will those two MPs now be penalised for calling this spill?
I don't think they'll be penalised, and you know they're entitled to do it, and I certainly value their friendship and they're good colleagues, but we have differences of opinion, and that's the beauty of a party.
Though, aren't they? This is a national embarrassment.
I wouldn't call it that. I think what they're causing is a distraction, and they're certainly taking the airtime from what should be a focus on policy and the issues that are important to Australians.
Would you like to see this spill being held as a secret ballot?
Look, that's an issue for those at a higher level than I, and I'm sure that will be resolved in coming days.
Surely, though, the whole question of leadership, is it a sound policy to say at least we're not like them, at least we're not like Labor? Is that the way to run a government?
Well, we're basing it on what we saw from Labor's time in government, and the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years were hugely disappointing to the Australian people, and they were emphatically rejected by the Australian people in the 2013 election. Let's not forget, Labor got its lowest primary vote in 100 years. That was a result of what Labor did in office, but also the effective opposition of Tony Abbott. Now, Tony Abbott has a job to do. He wants to get on to do it. I think my colleagues should join together to give him that support. You see, the Liberal Party has never ever thrown out a Prime Minister in their first term. John Gorton was elected to the leadership in 1968. He won an election in 1969 and he went out a few years later. If we were to remove Tony Abbott as a party room from the Prime Ministership of Australia, that would mean 6 Prime Ministers in 8 years in Australia. Now, Canberra is not Rome. That's what happens in Italy. That's what happens in Greece. It's not what happens here in Australia.
But surely this leadership...
We don't want to be like it. Isn't there actually a really good case for removing Mr Abbott? I mean, he's doing very poorly in the polls. You're going to head for defeat anyway. Why not make the change now and get someone better in?
Because governments of both political persuasions do poorly in the top polls over the life of their political cycle. And I often point to the fact that John Howard, who, dare I say it, a father figure in the Liberal Party and somebody who's expressed his strong support for Tony Abbott in recent days. John Howard was behind 10 points behind Mark Latham and 10 points behind Kim Beazley, and he came back and defeated them both. And so I think that Tony Abbott can do it again, but he needs the room to be able to put his case to the Australian people, and in recent days he hasn't had that room for obvious reasons. And so that's why the defeat of this party room ballot on Tuesday will hopefully give him the room to get on with governing for all Australians.
Basically, within a month or two of the PM taking office, he was well behind in the polls. He's been well behind ever since, and it's just obviously got worse in recent times. So the analogy with Mr Howard is somewhat stretched because he did not face that same initial hostility. Comment on that, and then also, what is the underlying problem with the government? I mean, there is something going on here, isn't there?
Well, in terms of John Howard, let's not forget that in 1998, when he took a new tax to the Australian people with the GST, he actually lost the two-party preferred vote, but he ended up winning office, and that was because of the power of incumbency and because of the power of his leadership. I just think that Tony Abbott deserves a fair go, and only halfway through his first term, and if we were to remove him, that wouldn't be a fair go. And I don't think my colleagues want to do that. I think they want to see us improve, and this is to your second point. I think they want to see us improve our communication to better explain our policies, the real impact that they have on the Australian people in a positive way. You see, just in the last few days, the cost of living for Australians is coming down. And one of the reasons has been the fall in the interest rate, 25 basis points. For an average Australian family with a $300,000 mortgage, that's a $750 a year saving off their home loan. You add to that the removal of the carbon tax, that's a $550 a year saving from their annual bill. You add to that the fall in oil prices as a result of what's happening internationally. That's for the average family a $1,000 saving to their annual bill. These are really good developments for Australian families, together with the broader reform agenda that we have. I think it's a good story to tell.
But are you seriously saying it's communication and not policy? For starters, you dropped the whole heaps of policies that
sure.
were unpopular. I mean, is it really just communication?
Well, look,
something else going on?
Well, on policy, I think we held on to some of those unpopular policies that we took to the last budget for a bit too long. Let's be frank. We probably held on to those for a bit too long. But with the
budget was poorly framed then?
Well, I think on some of the measures they were unpopular and they were not fully understood and they weren't maybe the best possible policies that we put forward to start with. And we saw with the Medicare co-payment, the health minister say that she's going to go back to consult with stakeholders. In relation to higher education, I think we're on the right track there. We've made some changes to recalibrate that package, but I do think that's in the best interests of the tertiary education sector. In relation to some of the welfare reforms, we need to explain the reason why we don't want to take away money from the next generation because we're not paying back Labor's debt. They're the sort of issues that we need to deal with in explaining our political and economic narrative. That's the job that's in front of us.
And knighting Prince Philip isn't a policy. I mean, there's just a case that the Prime Minister's out of touch, isn't he?
No, the Prime Minister's not out of touch. But when you talk about the knighting of Prince Philip, sure, that didn't go down very well in some quarters. but nobody died. That wasn't the disaster of the pink bat scheme. That wasn't the disaster of the banning of live animal exports to Indonesia and what that did to the bilateral relationship. On the scale of 1 to 10, that was right down the bottom in terms of its impact on people's lives. So I don't think that should obscure the broader achievements of the government, and I don't think that should obscure the broader policies that we are taking forward.
Are you angry that so many of your colleagues in Victoria seem to be set to against the Prime Minister?
Well, in terms of my colleagues, I can point to all the members of the Cabinet who have been very clear in supporting Tony Abbott, whether it's Bruce Bilson, Greg Hunt, Kevin Andrews, or what Andrew Robb said the other day. The Prime Minister needs more time, deserves more time. He doesn't support the spill motion. As for my other colleagues, they've all come out in recent days. Michael Sukkar, who's got the most marginal coalition seat in my state of Victoria, has been a strong supporter of the Prime Minister and was out there at a doorstop with him today. Sarah Henderson, another marginal seat, had the Prime Minister to a local pub just the other day. We can go through, Jeff Kennett doesn't speak for Victoria, and neither do I speak for the Victorian team, but I think that the Prime Minister does have the support.
The government in New South Wales finally is very worried that the Tony Abbott factor will drag them down. If the PM does survive next week and there's a bad outcome in the New South Wales poll, can he possibly hang on after that?
Well, I think we're taking this idea of explaining state elections based on federal policies or federal personnel a bit too far. In relation to Victoria, they lost the election for reasons other than the federal government. In fact, where the federal government had a policy like the East-West Link, we won all the state seats along that line. In Queensland, when a state government has nearly a 70-seat majority, and the Premier at the time, Campbell Newman, comes out and says this election is being fought on state issues, and then they lose, you can't point the finger at Tony Abbott and federal policies. Here in New South Wales, I think Mike Baird is a very effective and a very popular Premier. I think he'll win his state election based on his performance, nothing to do with federal issues. Any other questions? Thank you very much.
That was Josh Frydenberg, the Assistant Treasurer, recently appointed, talking there about his support for the Prime Minister. He says that the Prime Minister deserves time, and he said that there was a good story to tell, a proper narrative for the government. But at this stage, up until now, the government had run into a couple of hurdles. He gave examples as the Medicare co-payment, higher education, a recalibration, he called it, and then welfare reforms. And he said that the Prime Minister is not out of touch. It's a matter of just him being given time.